Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith was back in Lethbridge, beefing up support for the UCP Lethbridge West candidate, John Middleton Hope. The province is willing to go to court to fight the Trudeau government on its latest emissions cap plan. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will explain. And as we get closer to a potential strike at Canada Post, we hear from an acting president of the Postal Workers Union in Alberta who explains what job action may look like.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith stopped by Lethbridge alongside UCP candidate for Lethbridge West, John Middleton Hope, in eager anticipation of the soon-to-be-called by-election. The two spoke with the city's Chamber of Commerce to address key issues and answer concerns and questions from the Chamber. When asked about when Smith will officially call the by-election, she says it's at the discretion of the official opposition leader, Naheed Nenshi, who is yet to have someone in his party step aside so that he can run in an NDP-friendly riding.
The by-election has to be called before January the 1st. So we have a bit of a window here. As I've mentioned before, I'm actually quite surprised that the leader of the official opposition has shown no interest in seeking a seat in the legislature. I understand he didn't want to run in Lethbridge West, but he had 37 other seats. And it's normally convention when somebody becomes leader that one of their colleagues steps aside for them so that they can get into the legislature. So I was genuinely waiting to see if anyone would do that. They have a few more days to be able to make that decision, and if they do, we'll call them both at the same time.
One of the most important things for the citizens of Lethbridge is to have strong, effective advocacy, and that's what I intend to bring to the table when I'm elected in Lethbridge West. I think it's critical that our citizens have those types of voices in the legislature. I'm already working with a number of ministers. We've already had a number of conversations about activities that will benefit the citizens of Lethbridge and the area. So I'll simply leverage those relationships. I'll be banging on their doors on a regular basis to get the resources that we need for the third largest city in the province of Alberta.
Now, provincial NDP leader Naheed Nenshi will also be stopping by Lethbridge on Friday to gather some support for his candidate for Lethbridge West, Rob Miyashiro. And BCN will have that story for you as well. The Alberta government announced a new initiative officials say will help speed up the home building process. Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says their focus right now is cutting more red tape and reducing delays that are slowing down housing construction.
The reality is in our province, housing starts are up 35% from last year. That starts rising to 33,577 homes so far in this year. Housing starts from January to September 2024 compared to January to September 2023 have seen province-wide, as I said, increases of 35%, but in Edmonton increases of 47%, Calgary increases of 23%, in Lethbridge increases of 305%, and in Red Deer increases of 115%. The other critical component is as we continue to see purpose-built rentals increase, which is something that we challenge the industry to do. We're really excited that almost a third of our new builds are all purpose-built rentals, which is critical to stabilizing the market.
Nixon adds the Stop Housing Delays portal will further allow the government to hear directly from developers, municipalities, and other partners on where delays are happening in the construction process. As you've heard on Bridge City News, the Trudeau government wants to put an emissions cap on our oil and gas sector, which would be 35% below 2019 levels. Premier Daniel Smith has blasted Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault on the idea, calling him deranged, and says the cap would kill thousands of jobs in our energy sector. Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, discusses steps the province could take and once again fighting back against Ottawa.
I would also probably expect the Alberta government to sue the federal government over this. Whether or not you can sue on a draft regulation, I think, is a bit of an open question. But certainly when there's final regulations, that might be an option for the Alberta government there. Bit of a mixed record fighting in court, the Alberta government over the last 5-6 years. So we'll see how that pans out if we go down that road. And of course, I mean, the other option here is there's a very good chance we're going to have a Conservative prime minister in the next year. So could just wait it out.
Mr. Tyler Dawson will also discuss how the province is developing a new school curriculum for all Alberta students. He'll have details coming up in the second half of our program. BC Premier David Eby says former Premier John Horgan was an inspirational leader who guided the province's NDP out of the political wilderness after being in opposition for 16 years. Eby says Horgan, who died following his third bout with cancer, was known for his compassion for people from all walks of life. He says Horgan also apparently had a bit of a temper.
I think for many British Columbians, he made them think differently about politics and about politicians. He was accessible, he was fun and funny, and he was called Premier Dad, and rightly so. For myself, he was a coach and a mentor. He was an inspiration to me, and he brought a spirit of fun to his work that was infectious. And many of you will remember, too, he had a bit of a temper from time to time. And if you hadn't been yelled at by John Horgan, then you hadn't truly worked with him.
Our country's Labour minister's decision to step in and end labour disputes at ports in British Columbia and Montreal is not sitting very well with the unions involved. The union, representing around 1,200 Montreal dock workers, plans to seek court action over Stephen McKinnon's decision to move the talks to binding arbitration. He's also ordered the resumption of all operations at the ports. The union called the move a dark day for workers' rights. The union, representing locked-out port workers in British Columbia, also says it will challenge the federal government's move amid a labour dispute involving more than 700 longshore supervisors halting some shipping traffic on the West Coast. McKinnon says the work stoppages have been impacting supply chains, thousands of jobs, and Canada's reputation as a reliable trading partner. The federal government is urging the Union of Postal Workers and Canada Post to negotiate a settlement ahead of a looming 72-hour strike notice by workers. Labour Minister Steve McKinnon says Ottawa is hoping to achieve a deal at the table. The union says its National Executive Board has yet to decide if job action will happen at the deadline and that it depends on Canada Post's actions at the bargaining table. Now, to talk about what workers have been fighting for is James Ball, acting president of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers Local 730, and joins us now from Edmonton. James, what would that job action potentially look like for your group?
There's a variable things that could happen. There could be a lockout by the corporation where all the members would be out on the street. There could be a full-on strike. There could also be rotating strike action, which would have different offices out at different times. So the idea there is to inconvenience our customers as little as possible while making it known that we have a position that we want to enforce, right?
Now, your union, Cup W, says you're seeking higher wages for workers, but what else are you fighting for?
There's a work method that Canada Post wants to change specifically for our letter carriers, the people who deliver your mail door to door. Right now, they work outside about 6 hours of the day, and 2 hours of the day they spend time preparing the material, sorting the mail that can't be handled by the machines, getting everything ready, and then they go out and do their job. But Canada Post wants to change the method of employment so that there'll be a person who's specifically responsible for sorting the mail, and then the carriers will be responsible for 7.5 hours of delivery out on the street. Right now, most carriers are doing 20 to 25 kilometers a day in that 6 hours. And if we add up that extra hour and a half, we're looking at 30 kilometers. And Canada Post has the highest injury rate of all federal sector employers. They don't get to control their workspace like most people do in a warehouse setting or something like that. But this method of work is not going to bring those injuries down.
Thanks so much for your time today, James. That was James Ball, acting president of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers Local 730, joining us from Edmonton. Well, we've been well above our seasonal averages weather-wise over the past couple of days here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, the warmer temperatures have been nice, but the mercury may be falling again soon?
You know, it will be by a bit, but not to the extent that one might think. We are still sticking in the seasonal range. We're still sticking around plus temperatures. We're just moving from double digits to single digits beginning Friday and then beyond into next week. Tomorrow, though, Thursday, we're still hovering around that 11-degree mark. Very lovely. The only difference is we've got the wind to contend with, and that's going to continue tonight and into tomorrow as well. So on Thursday, expect those wind gusts up to 50 and even 60 kilometers per hour, but we're still sticking in the seasonal ranges, so that is definitely a plus for this time of year. And I'll be back later in the show to give you that national forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. You know, good works are often noticed and recognized, especially those which have a great impact in our community. Such is the case with the Platinum Award the Streets Alive mission received during the 2024 Lethbridge Community Votes campaign. The Repurposed Donation Center from the Christian organization was recognized in both the community group and second-hand clothing and consignment categories. Streets Alive's Chief Operations Officer Cameron Kissick explains what winning this award really means to them.
It shows the community support for our organization, not just, you know, to get out there and actually vote for us in these areas is amazing. So with the Repurposed Center, it is designed for individuals who are newly housed, perhaps newly to Canada, or just find themselves in a situation where they may have found lodging but cannot afford the basic household needs, utensils, pots, pans, furniture, beds, you name it. If you need it in your house, we try to have it here, which also means if you need it in your house and you have extra, we would love to take your donations from you because we need them out. So it's designed for individuals to come get that.
Now, Streets Alive mission also addresses the basic needs of people experiencing homelessness or addiction in our city, including providing clothing, a warm or cool place to stay, and fully licensed treatment facilities for men and women to help them overcome their addictions. Supporting belonging and well-being is part of the YMCA Lethbridge's mantra. Now, in its quest to serve and benefit our community, the charity runs a number of programs for kids, youth, and families. Now, YMCA Lethbridge Community Development Manager Christina Larkin explains what programs the nonprofit group offers that are making a big difference here in Lethbridge.
Every year here at the YMCA, we have over 10,000 monthly members. We have thousands more, daily visitors. We also have a number of programs that are offering services. For example, we're serving over, I think we're over 50 teens per month on free tutoring. We're serving nearly 30 children or 30 teens who are suffering from a suspension from school and need support to return to school. Mental health programs, having pools, having gyms, having youth programs, education programs, mental health services, as well as doing work in their communities, things like housing, employment programs, anti-poverty work, and just trying to build their community into a safe environment where everyone can thrive. We look at what does our community need and does it tie to something that YMCAs are great at, which is supporting belonging and supporting well-being.
And did you know internationally, the YMCA has over 90,000 staff and more than 920,000 volunteers around the world. Lethbridge police are asking for our help in locating a 36-year-old woman who is wanted on outstanding warrants. Layla Grace Whalen faces numerous charges stemming from a break-and-enter on July 5th, where she and others had firearms in their possession. Whalen was granted bail in October and shortly breached her conditions of release, resulting in warrants for her arrest being issued. Police have attempted to locate her, but so far have been unsuccessful. The LPS is asking if anyone has seen Whalen to call them right away at 403-328-4444 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. The Professional Bull Riders Canada's Elite Cup Series is set to return to Lethbridge for its 7th consecutive season next year from February 28th to March 1st. Lethbridge is one of the more favored stops on the tour. Now that's according to Jason Davidson, General Manager for PBR Canada. He shares with BCN what spectators can expect to see when the show comes back to the Windy City in 2025.
Our show is always evolving. Whether it be with our sponsor activations, which are always crowd engaged. The level of competition, I think, on both the bull riding athlete and the bovine athlete is what we'll see the big change in. This year, we, in 2024, we just handed out $250,000 in prize money in Rogers Place this past weekend, and on the season, almost just shy of $1 million. So. The secret's out that PBR Canada is a place to make some money, and not only do you get Canada's best bull riders, but we also see an influx of the U.S., Brazilian, and Australia riders entering our events now too, which just makes that level of competition that much better.
Now, tickets for the PBR go on sale November 15th and are available by visiting visitlethbridgearena.ca. Looking forward to it. Officials at the Calgary Zoo are mourning the loss of a 2-year-old female lowland gorilla. Officials say the gorilla died after being injured when moving between the back of house spaces at the zoo. An investigation is underway.
It is with broken hearts that we share the devastating news of the sudden passing of our beloved 2-year-old female Western lowland gorilla, Iari. Earlier today, Iari was injured when moving between back-of-house spaces. Her care team and our veterinary staff acted extremely quickly to save her, but Iari subsequently passed away as a result of her injuries. An investigation will be undertaken, including necropsy, to understand what happened and any changes to processes or infrastructure that need to be made to prevent this from happening in the future. Iari was born here at the zoo in 2022, the first offspring for Dam Dossie and sire Jasuri. Her passing will leave an immense hole in the hearts of our organization and our community.
Very sad. Well, for sports fans, especially football fans, it's a big weekend coming up. The Grey Cup will be played Sunday in Vancouver. It'll be the Winnipeg Blue Bombers taking on the Toronto Argonauts in the championship match. Both coaches say it's not easy making it to the Grey Cup.
As soon as the schedule comes out, you kind of lay out, your calendar and what you want to get accomplished for that season and what you got to do. But it's tough to be here, to get in this Grey Cup. I think we have a small league as far as number of teams. Everybody thinks it's easy to get here. It's tough. Now you have injuries, you have different things. The process of building your team, building your locker room. Now we're gonna have some adversity, right? It ain't easy. You got a bunch of men with testosterone that want to be in this game so badly. And when you get here, you enjoy it, but you also got to keep the focus on the end goal is to win it.
Prior to being a coach or a player, I was also a fan of the league, and I like what it does for our country. I like the opportunity it gives our young football players. So yeah, it's always exciting and always brings out a ton of emotion.
Such a beautiful trophy, that Grey Cup, wow. Well, we had some brisk winds today in Lethbridge, but fairly mild. Actually, nice football playing weather, but will the warm temperatures be sticking around? All of those weather details are coming up. We experienced more of that legendary Lethbridge wind on Wednesday, but fortunately, it's been a nice warm wind. Jeanette Rocher is here now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the above seasonal values will only be with us, a little while longer?
Well, we still have a lovely 11-degree day before us on Thursday here, and then things are going to cool off a little bit, but still mostly staying in the seasonal range, and some of those days even above seasonal. So average high for this time of year is 4 degrees. So many of these days still staying above seasonal. Even the lower ones are still above that is freezing mark, though, which is lovely. So down to 6 on Friday, which again is above seasonal. 3 degrees on Saturday, up to 9 again on Sunday, again above seasonal, and then 3 degrees Monday and 1 degree next Tuesday to round out that 7-day forecast. So average high for this time of year, 4 degrees, average low -7. We've been sticking mostly above that range and then sometimes just within that range. Not too bad. 18 was our record high on this day. That happened back in 2001. And in 1955, Lethbridge saw its coldest, which was -33. 8:41, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 5:50 p.m. Days getting shorter. Each day about 3 to 4 minutes shorter than the previous day. Okay, 12 for a high tomorrow in Victoria, looking at a mix of sun and cloud. 20K winds, more like 50K in that one to Fuca Strait. Looking at 70% chance of showers in Vancouver tomorrow. 11 for the high there. 5 for the high in Edmonton with a mix of sun and cloud, and partly cloudy skies as well tomorrow in Calgary with a high of 9 degrees. Okay, we're seeing more precipitation as we look at the rest of the prairies here. Saskatoon, we're seeing 30% chance of showers or flurries, high of 7 degrees there. Regina seeing some showers, 9 for the high there. 6 degrees the expected high tomorrow in Winnipeg with a mix of sun and cloud. And as we get over into Toronto, we're also seeing some showers, 70% there, 7 for the high, 2 degrees the high tomorrow in Ottawa, and a high of 3 degrees in Montreal with mainly clear skies there. As we look to Atlantic Canada, let's see what's happening in the old Maritimes here. Clear skies in Fredericton, 3 degrees for the high, 3 for the high also in Halifax. Seeing showers there, showers also expected in Charlottetown tomorrow, 4 for the high there. 12 degrees expected in St. John's. However, St. John's under a whole bunch of things here. So we got a wind warning and a rainfall warning in effect, prolonged rain. We're looking at 90 to 120 millimeters of rainfall between now and the end of this, which is Thursday evening. And then winds gusting up to 100 kilometers tonight along parts of the coast. But by tomorrow, seeing more like a 40K wind. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
As tensions rise in the Canadian port work stoppages, both unions being sent to binding arbitration by Federal Labour Minister Steve McKinnon are challenging the decision in court. The union representing Montreal's 1,200 dock workers say they'll be making the challenge after the Maritime Employers Association locked out workers at the Port of Montreal on Sunday after they voted to reject what employers called a final contract offer. The union representing locked out port workers in BC, meanwhile, also says it will challenge the federal government's move amid a labor dispute involving more than 700 longshore supervisors halting some shipping traffic on the West Coast. Minister McKinnon has directed the Canadian Industrial Relations Board to order the resumption of all operations. Bitcoin prices touched a record high on Wednesday, peaking north of $93,000 US. The world's largest cryptocurrency is up more than 30% since the U.S. federal election. Investors flock to Bitcoin and other digital assets under the presumption that President-elect Donald Trump will follow through on his pro-crypto campaign promises. He suggested appointing a crypto presidential advisory council and creating a strategic national Bitcoin stockpile. The price of Bitcoin has more than doubled so far this year. Now here's an update to a story we brought you on Tuesday concerning the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses' criticism of the federal carbon tax. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland has assured the group that the carbon rebate for small businesses will be tax-free. She shared a statement on social media clarifying the program's parameters. Her response followed a letter from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business last week, which said that it was simply unfair to make the rebate for small firms a taxable benefit. Apple is introducing a new way for users to locate and recover lost items in collaboration with third parties through their upcoming software update. The new feature, called Share Item Location, is anticipated to vastly help air passengers with retrieving misplaced luggage in collaboration with various airlines. Air Canada announced that they are partnering with Apple to integrate the Share Item Location in the Air Canada app to improve its baggage handling process. The service is expected to be ready immediately when the iOS 18.2 update is released. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 66 points on the day to finish at 24,989. The Dow was up 47 points to 43,958. The S&P 500 was up just over a point today to 5985, and the Nasdaq was down 50 points to 19,230. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 5 cents to 68.07 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 7 cents to 2.97 US. Gold was down 25.37 on the day to 25.7255 US an ounce, and silver was down 41 cents to $30.30 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.38 per bushel, barley's at $6.29, canola's at $14.52, and corn is at $7.49 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was down 38 cents to $184.03. Feeder cattle were down $1.75 to $264.05. And lean hogs December contract was down 48 cents to $81.88. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 71.50 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the federal Labour Minister's decision to step in and end labour disputes at ports in British Columbia and Montreal is not sitting well with the unions. The unions, representing around 1,200 Montreal dock workers and 700 longshore supervisors in BC, plan to seek court action over Steve McKinnon's decision to move the talks to binding arbitration. McKinnon has also ordered the resumption of all operations at the ports. The union in Montreal called the move a dark day for workers' rights. The Alberta government may be taking the Trudeau government to court over Ottawa's latest emissions cap. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details for us coming up momentarily. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. As you've heard on Bridge City News, the Alberta government fired the entire AIMCO board last week. Now, the group manages public pension funds in our province, along with a Heritage Savings Fund. The group was also the probable manager of the Alberta Pension Plan, should we pull out of the CPP. Now, to chat about this and more conversation here is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, Finance Minister Nate Horner wiped out the board, citing rising expenses and the returns were simply not good enough?
Yeah, that's what he's arguing. Now, there certainly has been some rising costs. There's been an increase in the number of sort of fees paid to third-party managers and salary and wage costs and things like that with AIMCO. Part of the reason for that is probably that it's simply grown. AIMCO has gotten, the funds managed by AIMCO have gotten bigger over the last several years. It's more than $160 billion at this point. So, but that's obviously part of the government's concern. The other part of the government's concern is the returns that AIMCO is generating. Interestingly, they've more or less actually cleared their sort of benchmark targets over the last 5 and 10 years by a percentage point here and 0.1 of a percentage point there, kind of thing. So they're exceeding their benchmarks, but AIMCO's investments are certainly not performing as well as some of the other large managed funds in the country. For example, the CPP, which you mentioned, the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund is doing better as well, for example. So those are sort of the facts as we know them. That's what the government is telling us about its justification for this, the costs and the returns. But I think it's fair to say that this whole affair has raised a lot more questions than it has answered them. We don't know who's going to manage the fund from here on out. We should know in the next 30 days or so. We don't know what this means for the Alberta Pension Plan, and we don't know what this means for the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. And those are sort of two big open questions. Now, this government they do seem to have backed off the Alberta Pension Plan proposal to some extent. But there's a good chance, if it happens, that AIMCO would be doing that management. So that does, sort of raise the question of how well would that fund be managed with all of Alberta's retirement funds. Now, the other question is the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Now, I should clarify that, in no case has the government said anything about this decision being made in relation to the pension plan or the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. These just happen to be questions that are coming up because the Heritage Fund is this huge block of money that's managed by AIMCO. And as I think we've talked about before, governments have a history of plundering the Heritage Fund to cover some of its budgetary needs, including Danielle Smith took $1.7 billion, I think, out of it a couple years ago. So it's on people's minds, I think. What does this mean for the Heritage Fund? And we just don't know answers to a lot of these questions at this point.
Previous premiers, I remember chatting with them, saying that the Heritage Savings Trust Fund is for rainy days, for Albertans. Well, there have been a lot of rainy days for Albertans struggling with the high cost of living, the housing crisis. Maybe we should dish out some of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to Albertans who desperately need it right now. Just a suggestion that I threw out there. Now, Tyler, in an effort to grow our province's tourism industry, the UCP has introduced a bill to allow for a 4-season resort to be built on Crown land. Now, it's apparently seeking to copy a similar template that BC uses for Whistler. Now, the question remains, where would the Alberta resort be located?
Well, exactly. And BC has a bunch of these. You can look at Big White, you can look at Whistler, you can look at Panorama probably in the Invermere area. There's a bunch of them all over BC. And it's less the case in Alberta. If you look at, say, Marmot Basin. There isn't really a resort up at Marmot Basin other than the ski hill, but there's nothing there in the summer really. The same for Sunshine Village and Lake Louise. There's no mountain biking in the summer in those areas. A little bit of hiking, I suppose. But anyways, the idea is to create this 4-season resort and that people will, flock to Alberta. It might spread some people out from some of the national parks, bring more money into the economy, that sort of thing. And the Crown land's not going to be sold. It'll be a 99-year lease. So that issue doesn't quite arise in this case. But, I do think it would probably be controversial depending where it goes. There's been a lot of concern lately about the amount of traffic going through the Ghost area in sort of southwest of the Sundre area, or I guess northwest of Cochrane. So where do you put it? What is it going to look like? Is it going to be a ski hill? Is it going to be a mountain bike resort? Is it going to be a gondola or a tram or something? So I think lots of questions have come up around this, but I don't know if anyone is immediately opposed to it. It seems like a relatively good idea. So I guess we'll see where it goes. Of course, it's going to be up to the private sector in large part, right? Because the government is creating the sort of parameters that would allow for an application, and it's going to create the board that would approve an application to do this. But it's really going to be up to the private sector probably to put up the money and put up the plans for it.
I got an easy plan. How about Sylvan Lake? Skating in the wintertime and a beautiful beach in the summertime, right? There you go. Tyler, the Alberta government introduced legislation to modify financial rules in the province, and the bill does two things of note. What are they?
Well, the first is that it will allow for halal mortgages. So under Islamic law, Muslims can't really take out a traditional mortgage because of the interest. So this would sort of reform some of the rules to allow for alternative financing measures. That could look like perhaps a rent-to-own scheme. That could look like paying fees instead of an interest on a mortgage, things like that. So it's just sort of broadens the accessibility of mortgage-like financial tools to another segment of the Alberta population. The second one, which I think we've talked about before, is the $200 tax on electric vehicle registrations. This was a little bit controversial when it first came up, and the government says, look, well, if you drive a car or a truck that has an internal combustion engine, good heavens, say that 10 times fast, you're paying about $200 a year in fuel tax. And so electric vehicles obviously aren't paying fuel tax, so they are going to get this other tax that that money will go into general revenues, help boost the government's finances. They hope to bring in about $5 million in the first year, and I think it'll go up to $8 million after that. So if you own a Tesla or something, you'll be paying a bit extra when your registration comes due.
Tyler, let's talk more about the Trudeau government's plan of an emissions cap in our oil and gas sector. Premier Daniel Smith has aggressively opposed the legislation, saying that Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault has, quote, a deranged agenda against Alberta. And the cap would apply across the country, but mostly impact Alberta and Saskatchewan, correct?
Yeah, and that's just simply because most of the sort of oil and gas and mining production happens in those two provinces. You know, there will be some effects on Newfoundland, for example, because they have an oil industry there as well, but it's primarily going to affect Alberta. The cap is still in draft form, so there could be some modification to that. Seems unlikely given the sort of vigor with which the federal Liberals have defended it over the past week. But what it would do basically is it would require oil producers to bring their emissions 35% lower than they were in 2019, and they would need to accomplish that by 2030, 2032. Little ways off yet, but the Alberta government is essentially arguing that an emissions cap is a de facto production cap. So the only way for the oil industry to make that target would be to cut back production, is what they're arguing. I guess we don't know yet if that's true, but that's certainly what the Alberta government is arguing. Now, the response to it is going to be interesting. Obviously, we have some sense of the war of words, Smith haranguing the federal government from sort of the bully pulpit, shall we say. But what are the actual mechanisms that can be used to resist this if they feel that's the road to go down? Well, the first, and it has more or less been promised, is some sort of motion under the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which would, well, we don't totally know what it would do. The best indication we have of this is that it just sort of means that Alberta's employees, whether that's public servants or Crown Corporation employees, wouldn't need to sort of help the implementation of this process. So Alberta would sort of take a step back, and if it's going to happen, we're not going to participate in it, so long as the law allows for that. So that's probably what that would do. The other option, of course, is a lawsuit. I would also probably expect the Alberta government to sue the federal government over this. Whether or not you can sue on a draft regulation, I think, is a bit of an open question. But certainly when there's final regulations, that might be an option for the Alberta government there. Bit of a mixed record fighting in court, the Alberta government over the last 5-6 years. So we'll see how that pans out if we go down that road. And of course, I mean, the other option here is there's a very good chance we're going to have a Conservative prime minister in the next year. So could just wait it out, because this is probably not a policy that a future Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre, is going to keep.
And Tyler, still no word yet on the by-election for Lethbridge West. Premier Daniel Smith says NDP leader Naheed Nenshi still needs a seat, so she wants to kind of hold them both simultaneously, saving taxpayers' money.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, if you run a by-election, obviously it costs some money in terms of the Alberta officials that are going to need to be involved in things like that. So she's saying, well, look, why don't we do them simultaneously and deal with it all at once? Nenshi does not seem quite so keen to run for a by-election seat. It's a little bit of a mystery. Not totally sure what's going on there. The legislature's obviously been back for a couple weeks, and he hasn't been a part of it. So there was an argument years ago when Jagmeet Singh first became leader of the federal NDP that if he stayed out of the House of Commons, he could sort of elevate himself above the fray, not get involved in the antics of question period, that sort of thing. So there's the possibility that's what Nenchi's people are thinking. Maybe they simply haven't convinced someone in caucus to step aside in a safe seat to allow him to run. That's also a possibility. But it's certainly a bit odd, right? I mean, if you're not in the House, you're not getting sort of social media clips from the jousting and things like that. And it's harder to come across the media. It's harder for the media to find you to comment on things. So it's a bit of an odd situation. But, well, the Lethbridge West by-election has to be coming at some point. It needs to be called before, I think, January 1st, 2025. So, which, gosh, that's what, 6-7 weeks away, which is frightening for all kinds of reasons. But certainly we should have some indication on that by the end of the year.
If you're looking for it, Naheed Nenshi will be here in Lethbridge on Friday, and we got Premier Daniel Smith here today. So there you go. Making this a priority, because, I mean, obviously this is a big seat that needs to be won. Both parties are targeting it. Tyler, a document that was released in April but was only reported on recently sets out the framework for developing a new school curriculum for all Alberta students. Now, there was a certain line that kind of jumped out and caught a lot of attention, including your own. Tell me a bit about it.
Yeah, really interesting. It was a line that said that, Alberta students should learn about the history of Alberta's oil industry, and Alberta students should learn about how Alberta oil is the most ethically produced oil in the world. This is a throwback to a 2010 book from Ezra Levant, the conservative commentator, called Ethical Oil. And he wrote the book basically saying, look, if I was trying to convince, sort of a progressive university student why the Alberta oil industry is a good thing, what would the argument be that I would make? And he basically says ethical oil is the argument. This is, this oil is produced in a jurisdiction that has equal rights for all, treats women and minorities better than some other places like Saudi Arabia or Iran or Russia or somewhere like that. And so that's sort of the argument. And I find it really fascinating because I think this argument, it's really become part of our political culture and the way we talk about the oil industry. You hear politicians say some version of ethical oil, making that some version of that argument. You hear it all the time. And it may now be sort of working its way into the curriculum when that's all said and done. So, I mean, obviously there's some controversy that's gonna come from that, whether that's from environmental groups. There's certainly been some pushback on this sort of stuff from the teachers' unions and some education experts and things like that. But it just really jumped out at me because this has been such an influential argument over the past sort of 15 years in Alberta, and it's just fascinating to see that it's being proposed in a more official sense in an education curriculum document.
The province is overhauling its access to information legislation. Now, Tyler, this is something that we use as journalists all of the time. Now, there are a couple of changes coming out that you're not too happy about. Can you explain?
Yeah, so this is one of those things that is a little bit inside baseball for journalists, although lawyers and business associations and stuff like that do use access to information or freedom of information requests all the time, basically to just pry out information from the government that they haven't publicly released. They might announce a policy and you'll say, well, I wonder what the advice was from the public service on that policy. So you ask for those documents. You may or may not get them, but at least you've tried. The changes are basically twofold. The first is that it will restrict from being released advice that staff have given to ministers, which and that's often a goldmine of information, because you might have an intemperate staffer say that something's a really bad idea and you have it in an email, and then when you get it, that's turns out to be a pretty good story. So the UCP is saying that, well, look, this was sort of the policy all along, and the NDP is saying, well, when we were in government, we released this stuff all the time. So little lack of clarity there, but certainly an official restriction, at least, on something that can be quite valuable for people using this legislation. And the other one is just extending timelines on how quickly responses to requests can be made. And this is a system generally sort of plagued by delays. So expanding that timeline a little bit, well, maybe not the end of the world, is certainly something that some journalists have looked at and gone, nah, darn, we're going to be waiting even longer for this stuff.
Very true. Tyler, the province is also lifting trapping restrictions around several fur-bearing animals, such as otters, lynx, and wolverines. Now, what was the justification for this, according to Forestry Minister Todd Loewen?
Well, the restrictions that are in place are for some of those animals pretty much a complete restriction on it. And Minister Lowen basically said, look, we have these restrictions and these limits, but we don't really know what the population of these animals looks like. And so his argument is one of the simpler ways to get a sense of what the population looks like is to open up trapping, and then trappers can report back how many they captured, things like that, and you can perhaps extrapolate the larger population out of those numbers. Now, of course, conservation advocates, I should say, are saying, "Wow, this process is completely backwards. Why wouldn't you err on the side of caution and try and do a count in some other fashion before lifting the rules?" So one of those things that might be a little bit controversial in some circles, but also a not inconsequential industry. I think there's about 1,600 people working in the trapping industry in Alberta, so it's not nobody, and I guess we'll see if counting the trapped animals sort of after the fact gives us a better estimate of what the populations look like.
21st century and still big business. Who would have thought that, you know? He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post. Tyler Dawson, thanks again for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me, Hal.
It seems loneliness is becoming more and more of an issue for Canadians these days, especially for the elderly. So how do those who are alone deal with situations that come up like sickness or some other kind of crisis? Well, joining us from Brampton to chat about this more is Kathy Matusiak-Costa. She is the Director of Compassionate Community Care. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kathy. Great to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so Kathy, maybe give us a brief little overview of what compassionate community care is all about.
So, Compassionate Community Care is a registered charity comprised of healthcare professionals and volunteers who provide support to vulnerable persons and their families during times of illness or crisis.
Okay, how widespread is the challenge of loneliness for seniors in Canada? Is it rising?
It is. And in our estimation, what we see through both our helpline and what we call the Hope Line is that calls are coming at a faster pace more often, especially towards the holidays. We get a number of calls leading up into Christmas, times like Easter and Thanksgiving, where we see loneliness is drawing more and more people to call and reach out.
Wow. Okay. So tell us how your Connecting with Seniors project calling service works. Who is this for and what are your target people?
Community of Hope Outreach, Connecting with Seniors Project, is a Canada-wide initiative to provide regular check-ins by phone or Zoom with seniors who may not be able to receive an in-person visitor. And that is hosted currently with our volunteers, which do these calls and make it available to Canadians.
That's so interesting. So how do you find out about the people who would benefit from a phone call or a Zoom call? Do they themselves contact you first, or can someone else refer them to you?
Absolutely. So we just heard from a member when they received a postcard in the mail from a sympathetic organization, and they called us asking about what we do, and we shared about the fact that we have this available to seniors across Canada, anyone age 55 and up. And they were astonished. They said, this is an answer to our prayers. And the lady on the phone said she was in her late 80s. She was living alone. She had no family, and she felt really isolated. And that this calling service would be a newfound opportunity for her. And she had no idea it even existed. And she thought that it was so hopeful to know that we offer this service.
Oh, that's so lovely. So what would a typical phone conversation sound like, and how long would it last? How often do calls get made to the same person?
Absolutely. So our goal is to pair seniors who are interested in having and receiving calls by volunteers who are committed. And so we are often looking for people who want to volunteer at minimum for a quarter to 2 quarters, so roughly 3 to 6 months in duration, to at least have that longevity with the call, that they can continue to be present in that senior's life and have a reliable, dependable, and a trusted person that they will know will be calling them. And when they hear about it, they often want to extend that service and even have more callers. So it is something that is growing, and it's especially something that I think will continue to draw more interest across Canada as people become aware of it.
Yeah, I would imagine that these people are building relationships too. It must be hard after that time frame to just kind of cut it off. Do you find that people continue sometimes with the relationship with the person?
Absolutely, absolutely. We continue to speak on a regular basis, and oftentimes when new callers come on board, they will have again a sympathetic ear and someone that wants to reach out to them on a regular basis. So it really does bring in a reliable, significant relationship in someone's life, a friendship that's really friendly. Yes,
And then there's
absolutely.
that sense of trust as well, because they're probably divulging all kinds of, information about themselves and their life stories and whatnot. How long would a typical conversation last?
So anywhere between half an hour to an hour, roughly. And we find that the calls happen every week, which is suitable for both the callers and those who are being called. But again, they can be accommodated and changed based on the person's flexibility and their availability as
Yeah.
well.
Oh, they must really look forward to that time every week. I can
Absolutely.
imagine. What kind
Yes.
of feedback are you getting from phone call recipients?
Absolutely. So the phone calls have been extremely positive. The feedback has been overwhelmingly appreciative, and just simply showing that they really value the time that we spend with them on the phones or on Zoom. And, they want to extend this to other people as well. So currently, we actually are looking for more seniors to join us on the calls. So if anyone wants to be called, we definitely encourage you to reach out to us. Regardless of where you are in Canada, we will make that opportunity made available to you. So we encourage many seniors to join us and come on board.
Right, right. Of course, like in the news lately, we've been hearing a lot about MAID or medical assisted suicide. In your experience, do these kinds of phone calls even prevent individuals for asking for assisted suicide or MAID?
Absolutely. We find that when people feel abandoned, they will reach out and look for things like euthanasia or assisted suicide. And that's a sad point that we see most often when people don't know about things like our service are made available to them. When they do hear about this service, it definitely encourages them. I just heard of a story last night where a young woman was meeting regularly with a woman who was in a nursing home, and the woman was quite, often she felt abandoned by the people around her, her family, her friends. And when this young woman started visiting her, just simply visiting her every week, it changed her life. And 6 months later, she found out that the woman had told her and confided and said, I'm so happy that you've been visiting me, and I have to tell you that before you came here as a volunteer, I was looking to have euthanasia. And she changed her mind because this visitor was dedicated and committed to seeing her every week. And they would play Scrabble. And there's something so simple, but simply by being with another individual, you can make all the difference.
Look at the impact that she's making on somebody's entire life, really. Right. And I
Absolutely.
understand your organization also offers some education and alternative options to anyone in that situation where they are considering MAID.
Right, exactly. And so what we do is we provide a holistic approach to an individual. If they encounter a situation, which we often see is the case, that they are distressed because they don't have either suitable accommodations or they feel sad, lonely, depressed, distraught, perhaps despair even, we can refer them to trusted counselors who are established, credible, and safe for them to contact and speak with them. We also will offer a referral if someone has encountered pain that they cannot or does not feel that they can be managed appropriately or adequately. We can refer them to a second medical pain expert or specialist and a professional who will be able to look at that situation and see if there's an opportunity to tweak and alter some of the things that they're doing to help them maneuver through that and manage that pain so that they can be in a better place and feel better about their treatment and options.
Oh, that's
And there's other
interesting.
things.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mhm. Yep. So other things we offer too is simply speaking to the individual. If it's an advocacy or family relational type of issue, we will often see that there's an opportunity to share in that dialogue with the family and partner with them so that they can find solutions that are work and help them to come to a better place.
Okay, and then along that same vein, you advocate for patients who are questioning maybe the kind of medical treatment or personal care that they're being offered. And are you able to maybe give us an example of what that might look like?
Sure. So sometimes we find that a person will not know about certain treatments that are made available or could be available to them. And so simply by calling us, they can get a second opinion or a second chance to revisit some of the options that might be an opportunity for them to examine in their treatment issues. An example, for example, would be a person who is, later in life, and we just had a lady who called us about this. She had shared with us that a friend of hers was in her late 80s and an otherwise routine procedure was not offered to her to fix a problem. And so when she reached us, she said, well, she was offered euthanasia. She wasn't offered the treatment. And I said to her, at this age, they may have said that to her because simply they didn't want to encourage her to go in and have another operation. But traditionally, this is something that is operated on and this can be fixed. So that person could be made, aware of that. And if she were to share that with her, she could go and seek out another opinion potentially. And that did happen. In fact, that issue was remedied and with a routine procedure, and the person sought that and it worked. So
Amazing. I would imagine sometimes there could maybe be conflict among decision makers and family members of a loved one. So how would you be able to help in a situation like that?
sure. So oftentimes we find that it is important to have a certain ability to advocate on behalf of the family in the persons who are involved in just simply sharing what is happening. We had a situation like this as well where we had differing opinions on both sides of the family. And with relation to the treatment their loved one was receiving, and it happened to be a parent in this situation. So, of the two parties, one party felt that they were neglecting their parent, their mother, and then the other side, they said that she was already at end of life, that they had exhausted all opportunities. And so, this was really a issue of confirming what was being told to them by the medical team, and in fact, ensuring that the person was receiving adequate care that involved both their pre-existing conditions, but also the situation that they were presently in, and looking at the evidence of what was being offered to them and why they were at the stage that they were at. And so we found that there was a common ground by simply being intermediaries between the two parties and speaking to them rationally and logically, reasonably, so that they understood. And also we were able to articulate to them what was the position at the place of the patient. What did they want? What were their preferences in this situation? So based on that evidence, we could make a reasonable approach in terms of what was necessary and help advocate on behalf of the patient, but also in between the two parties.
Oh, wow. And then I understand that you also advocate for elderly who may be suffering abuse. So what kinds of things constitute elder abuse, and what should folks be on the lookout for?
Absolutely. There are so many instances of elder abuse when people start corresponding or speaking to someone on a regular basis. They might find that a person feels pressure to do certain things by their family or loved ones. Some examples would maybe financial abuse. And most often we see that happening within the family potentially if a person feels that they are being manipulated, or they may not say that, but they feel that they're obliged to help fund certain things for the rest of their family, for their children, for example. So a normal trip to the grocery store ends up being groceries for someone else and not for them. And yet that person ends up falling short. We see other examples of where people may feel that their care is being neglecting, and they feel a sense of abandonment, but they don't voice that. And so this is an important point, that if, for example, there's not enough adequate resources or staff available to feed a person, we often see this is the case too, that a person may be having early onset dementia and they're not being fed properly or adequately. And so that person starts to, lose weight and it starts to affect their physical well-being. So it's very important for family members to be involved directly in relationship with their loved ones and ensure that they're getting adequate treatment, nourishment, food. This is important, pivotal. And we saw this especially during the lockdowns and unfortunately during COVID, where one member called us and she had said that she would go and see her mother repeatedly, daily to feed her. And unfortunately, after lockdowns happened, her mother passed away about 2 weeks later. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a sad story, but some good information that you're offering there and some great work that your organization is doing. Are you looking for more volunteers to make phone calls or visits to lonely seniors? And how does
Absolutely.
a person, how do people do that?
Absolutely. So we offer a free online virtual training session. It's called the Being With My Story Visitors Training, and it is a volunteer program. So if you're interested in volunteering in your community, it is a wonderful opportunity to apply to your own network where you can start volunteering very quickly. And it's what I call the launching program. It's a jumpstart. It's a turnkey operation opportunity because people literally take our program. It's 4 hours in length, and that includes Q&A. And you can do it in person. We've been invited to places across Canada, from the west to the east and centrally here in Ontario. And we offer these both in person but also online, wherein we can have a group go through the training, learn how to be a visiting compassionate visitor, and be able to visit effectively in their communities. And so it's a wonderful opportunity. We encourage people to use reminiscent therapy. So we have a booklet. It's called the My Story booklet, and I'll just show it to you here. That's a sample. And it's it's an interview style workbook. So we start from the beginning of their life to their current state, going through their whole lifespan, how they grew up, who
Wow. So it becomes like a book of memoirs.
Exactly.
I
Absolutely.
love that.
Yes, it's a living legacy. And so they can then pass that along and inherit it to, bring it to their children, their grandchildren. And it becomes a wonderful opportunity to share their wisdom, their information, their memories, and really is a healing opportunity and tool for many people, because so many people don't have an opportunity to share about who they are and really share that their life has meaning and purpose and value. And all of that comes through in those visits because they start to reminisce about their life and who they love, that they were loved, and that they shared an important role in many lives. And so it is a really great opportunity for many people to be part of. Yes.
Yeah, and I would imagine the volunteer taking the dictation.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
What
Yes.
a neat little thing to do. And I bet they just absolutely love it that somebody's taking the time to actually care to ask these questions. And then it gives
Absolutely.
them the chance to walk down memory lane. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, Kathy, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate having you on and learning more about this.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kathy Matuziak-Costa is the Director of Compassionate Community Care. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.